Hello, everybody. I'm Detective George Harms with Bloomington Police.
And I'm Detective Erica Brown.
We're here today for a community notification in reference to a level 3 predatory offender that's moved into the city of Bloomington. With that said, Brad from the Department of Corrections is here to assist with that. So go ahead, Brad.
All right, thank you, Detective, and thank you, everybody, for taking the time to review this important information. As you heard, my name is Brad Vandervet, and I'm with the Minnesota Department of Corrections in the Risk Assessment and Community Notification Unit. And so I'm going to take you today through a PowerPoint-driven presentation on the individual you're here to learn about. I'm going to mute my camera just because it can be distracting as the slides are up, but I will continue to present over the microphone to you. And so with meetings like this, the way we've found that really serves to be the most effective way to share this important information is to break it into 3 distinct portions or chunks. We begin with our kind of foundation setting, where we're going to discuss the background and overview of the state's broader risk management systems and how they apply to this unique population. And then we'll take that information and transition into the specifics about the man you're here to learn about today, and then move on into additional information and resources as you set out to apply this information into your own family and broader community safety planning efforts. So where we've come to understand that meetings or conversations like this begin best is with that core knowledge of what we as agencies and organizations and communities understand. And that is that those who engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, they exist. And they are within every community throughout the state and beyond. So the question then really becomes, what is it we are doing as various organizations and agencies to address those who come through our criminal justice systems? And so one of the first key components or pillars of that broader state risk management system came online in the early 90s. And this is the sex offender registry. Now, in its first inception, this registry focused on adult males who abduct children. And it was really driven by the advocacy of the Wetterling family following the abduction of their son, Jacob. The Wetterling family and other agencies and organizations in support of victims of this type of harm really started to go around and ask law enforcement at the time, what more can we do to assist you and your agencies with this important work of policing this unique population? And at the time, law enforcement said very resoundingly, what they needed was a tool that brought together all of their information into one central space or location. Because at the time of Jacob's disappearance, agencies were collecting and retaining important information on those engaging in risky behavior within their jurisdiction in their own file systems. But it would take a period of time for an agency to be sought out for information, for them to collect it from their file systems, retrieve it, format it into a fax or an email, and get that over to a companion agency that needed it most in a critical time. And that delay, that lag, became very problematic. And so by creating the registry, what the state legislature had done was created a central location for all agencies' information to be retained so that law enforcement can access it when they need to in those critical moments, so that they can quickly whittle down any potential suspects as they are moving forward to intervene in a crisis situation. Now, the registry has grown and changed over the years from its inception in the 90s. It collects and retains a significant amount of very particular information about those required to be on it. It is maintained by the state's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and the information it collects is determined to be private information by law. And that means it can only be accessed by law enforcement or corrections for the very specific purposes of managing this population. The information that's collected includes a registrant's primary residence, those places that they spend the majority of their time, but it also includes other secondary addresses, places that they may frequent. So think of locations like vacation properties, significant others' homes, or family members' homes. If they're going there with any regularity, that information must also be made known to local law enforcement. They must share their employment information, and if they operate a motor vehicle for that employer, that also must be made known to law enforcement. Any schools that they attend must be made known to law enforcement, and any vehicles that they use, own, or possess have to be registered as well. A failure to register any of this information may result in a new felony conviction for failing to register. It is itself a crime to not comply with these laws. Additional information that's collected and retained by the registry are photographs, including those of scars, marks, tattoos, or distinguishing features of the individual. They must also register any phone numbers that they have, and they have to register any places they rent, like storage units. And so you can see the robustness of the data collected. Now, over the years, I mentioned that the registry has grown and changed, and it has extended its focus from just those engaging in abduction of children to include all criminal sexual conduct convictions or charges. That extension goes beyond just criminal sexual conduct and includes any sexual conduct involving a minor, which includes those engaging in generating or distributing or possessing pictorial representations of minors involved in sexual behavior or conduct, formerly known as child pornography. It is now known as child sexual abuse material or imagery. And you'll see in Minnesota that we've expanded even further beyond those sex-specific crimes to include non-sex-specific crimes or convictions such as kidnapping. And so the name of the registry had to change because it was no longer just those engaging in sexual harm. And so we changed the name to the Predatory Offender Registry. So if you've noticed that change over the years, this is why it had to evolve. Now, as I mentioned with the registry, the information retained on it is for law enforcement purposes only. But for meetings like this, I can take a snapshot, kind of an overview of what's going on around Minnesota communities in order to really help sensitize you to the depth and breadth of what's really going on. And so as you can see here from this information, as of the first of this year, we had approximately 17,494 known registered individuals in the state of Minnesota. That is all of them. This includes those with no risk level assigned and those of levels 1, 2, or 3. And as of April 17th, the date of this recording, I took a snapshot of that 17,494, and this is its current breakdown within your areas. 3,014 are reporting primary residence within Hennepin County. That smaller number to the right, 162, are those who are subject to broad notification, those that we get to have these types of conversations about. You can see as I narrowed in my focus onto Bloomington proper, of that 3,014, we had 162 at the moment of this snapshot reporting primary residence within the Bloomington jurisdiction. One of whom, the man you're here to learn about today, is the subject to that broad notification. And you can see neighboring counties in your area. Again, the larger number to the left are all registered individuals reporting primary residence within those jurisdictions. The smaller number to the right are those subject to broad public notification. Some key takeaways from this information is your thinking about this are the understanding of where this falls within the greater context of sexual harm. And as you're looking at these numbers, I want you to think in your mind of a funnel. And from what we know, from all of our available data and research, and we have a deep bench of knowledge and research on this topic, is that of those crimes in a sexual nature that are occurring, we know that only a fraction of them are even getting reported to law enforcement. And our funnel begins to narrow right out of the gate. Of those crimes that get reported to law enforcement, only a portion of those may go on to receive formal charges from the county attorney's office. And we narrow yet again. Of those formally charged, only a portion of that group may find that they are convicted of their alleged crimes. And we narrow once more. And of those convicted, only a portion of that group may go on to enter a prison. And I'll explain here in just a moment why that's a unique designation. But by the time we get to these numbers here in front of you, know that we are well down the neck of that funnel to about 2/3, if not a little more. And so broad awareness is just absolutely critical when considering how to implement this information into those safety planning efforts. Because as you can see, this is just a small portion of the broader issue that we're talking about today. And moreover, we know that where these individuals reside, where their head hits the pillow at night, is where their risk is at its lowest. It is where they spend their waking hours, where we need community awareness at its best. And we know that their waking hours can be spent anywhere as they're crossing city boundaries, county boundaries, state boundaries, and beyond, day in and day out for all manner of purposes and reasons. The next big component of that broader state risk management system that we've been discussing came online a number of years after the registry in 1997, and that is the Community Notification Act. This is the law that permits law enforcement to share key information about designated individuals, that smaller number to the right from my previous slide. And because Notification Act is the reason we're here today and able to have this important conversation, it's worth breaking it down a bit further to understand better how it functions and works. So you recalled from those numbers, not everybody is subject to a notification. And this is why. The Community Notification Act requires that a registered predatory offender cross the threshold of prison or the state security hospital known as the Minnesota Sex Offender Program at Moose Lake or St. Peter in order to receive a risk level assessment and assignment. Any prison will do in the state of Minnesota or throughout the nation, to include U.S. territories or military prisons or federal prisons. It does not apply, notification does not apply to those juveniles on the registry. And in Minnesota, we place juveniles as young as age 10 onto the predatory offender registry. It also does not apply to adults who are granted a stayed or probationary sentence. If you've heard the terms probation and parole used kind of synonymously with one another and never wondered why they're different terms or what they may mean, this is what they refer to. Probation, think of that as pre-prison. That is the court sentencing somebody, convicting them of the alleged crime and sentencing them to a prison term and then suspending that term or staying it for a period of time and placing them onto supervision within the community with an expectation that they adhere to a specific set of rules and expectations. And so long as they go through that process successfully and complete within the time frame allotted without violating in a significant enough way, that stay remains intact and they never cross the threshold of prison. Remember, it has to be prison, not jail. Those individuals would be considered no level designees, no risk level assigned. It would not be meant to imply that there is not risk involved or risk factors associated with that person. It simply means that the state has not measured or weighed those risk factors unless or until they cross that threshold. And so this is where you get those designations. So for those that do cross the threshold, that do enter into our prison systems or any prison system throughout the nation, the responsibilities per the law are broken down as follows. The Department of Corrections is tasked with the role of assessing and assigning risk levels. And that is done through the End of Confinement Review Committee, or the ECRC. This committee convenes 90 days prior to a registered individual's release back into Minnesota communities, and they weight all of those components that we do or that we collect and retain from a big data pull. We collect all the information available, from treatment summaries to psychosexual assessments and evaluations, collateral contacts with family members, victims, etc., law enforcement reports, probationary reports, everything we can get our hands on, so that our assessors can then apply this through our risk assessment tool known as the MinSOST, or the Minnesota Sex Offender Screening Tool. Now, this tool is important to understand, at least somewhat, as it is what basically assigns that level. And so the MinSOST is normed off of a population from a Minnesota study. That study began in the early 90s when these laws were coming online and taking effect. And the first initial phase of it concluded in the early 2000s, with a follow-up chunk or phase concluding in 2012. But that initial chunk focused on 3,166 known adult male sex offenders as they re-entered Minnesota communities at that release date. And it tracked them. The assessors or the researchers tracked those individuals through their time in the community, considered at-risk time, on supervision, all the way through, in some cases, to the point where they've expired from supervision. And those assessors marked those individuals' successes and their failures. And for those that went on to reoffend in a same or similar fashion, those who recidivated, their conduct and behavior became those known predictive risk factors that is applied in this assessment tool. So when I speak today about a level 1 designee, know that what I'm saying is that this individual scores at a lower amount of those known predictive risk factors as compared to that peer group from the study. A level 2 has a moderate amount of those known predictive risk factors, and a level 3 has a higher amount of those predictive risk factors. Things to keep in mind about risk assessment tools is that while they are very good at assisting law enforcement and corrections to focus their attention on those identified risk areas in order to mitigate them where possible and eliminate them if we're able, the one thing a risk assessment tool cannot do is predict the future. Another thing to keep in mind about risk assessment tools is that risk is dynamic. It is fluctuating and changing all the time. And so what I mean by that is that a level 1 designee today, if they are not adhering to those expectations of corrections, if they're involved with corrections, law enforcement, and moreover, the community, and they're engaging in known patterns of predictive behavior, they may find that they are reassessed by that committee and their risk may go up. Just the same as a level 3 designee who's shown a lengthy period of time of adherence to those mitigating strategies, who has internalized those positive pro-social behaviors that bring their risk down, may find that they are reassessed and their risk level moves down. So do keep that in mind as I go forward today. So once a risk level is assessed and assigned, our handoff then goes to our partners in law enforcement. And law enforcement is tasked with the sole responsibility of providing notification within the scope of the risk level assigned. For a level 1 designee, law enforcement will provide notification to other law enforcement agencies that they determine may be needed to be involved or need to know. Often we see this with those who are maybe more rural registrants, and the county sheriff knows that this individual is going to frequent a local city or community to go grocery shopping or get their treatment needs met, etc. They may provide information to that local PD as well, or in addition to. They will notify victims of or witnesses to the offense if they've requested that level of enhanced notification. Not all victims want to hear of or be reminded of the individual that caused them harm. But for those that do, law enforcement will provide them direct information about that registrant. as they re-enter the community. And law enforcement, in addition to those individuals and entities, will also notify immediate adult household members residing in that domicile with that registrant. And that is the scope of a level 1 notification. A level 2 notification builds on those individuals and entities we've just discussed and includes additional individuals or entities that law enforcement determines to be at risk based on that given registrant's known patterns of conduct and behavior. Now, it's often believed that this means law enforcement will provide notification to schools, daycares, churches, places where children or vulnerable populations may congregate and be found. And that very well may be true, but it is not always the case. So take, for example, a level 2 entering in a community, and law enforcement receives that dossier of information from the risk assessment unit and determines that this registrant targets their offending conduct and behavior against adult females at bars. This level 2 puts chemicals into women's drinks, rendering them unconscious. In that scenario, law enforcement may very well target their notification on local proprietors of bars or spaces where people congregate and imbibe. This would be a very targeted notification. And they would do that perhaps over or outside of notifying, say, the local daycare that provides care to children from infancy to school age. And so you can see the uniqueness of this type of notification. Now, on the flip side, if law enforcement becomes aware of a level 2 entering their community, and this individual targets or focuses their offending conduct and behavior against unaccompanied minors, think teenagers in transition from school to after school programming or to on their way home. And law enforcement knows that within their community, they have a teen hangout spot, a place where these kids come together in these downtimes and congregate and socialize. And law enforcement in this scenario may very well target their notification to the proprietor of that teen hangout spot and show them their face sheet and say, if you see this individual here attempting to formulate relationships of trust or to create contacts with potentially vulnerable kids, let us know. And we want to come out and talk to them and find out more about what they may be up to. And that is the nuance, ultimately, of a level 2 notification. And with a level 3 notification, this is our broad public notification. The one thing you can expect with this level of notification across the board throughout the state is that law enforcement will authorize the Department of Corrections to place that individual onto the Department of Corrections public registrant search site. This site is often confused by the public as being the registry. It is not. It is solely for those deemed at that level, either level 3 or a discharge from MSOP, the state security hospital, have to go onto that site when they're in the community. And so anything beyond activation on the public registrant search site is value added, and it grows and changes with the community and the way that it receives important information. It can include recordings much like this. It can include at times mailers. It can include press releases, posting on social media, so on and so forth. It is varied and dynamic and really comes down to how law enforcement communicates best with its community. I'm going to shift gears and talk to you now about some of the information that came out of those research studies, both here in the state and nationally, so that you can use some of this key information as you contemplate how you want to apply it into your own family safety planning efforts. And I like to begin my data at the narrowest end of that funnel, as we discussed earlier. Those individuals that have crossed the threshold, been assessed and assigned a risk level, and are now re-entering Minnesota communities. Now, year after year, that number and these percentages do fluctuate and change to some degree. But what we find on average is that the majority of risk levels assigned are those of levels 1 and 2. About 15% on average, again, are assigned that level 3 designation. And so you can see here just again how important having that broad perspective is. While we definitely want to pay attention to that 15%, those identified individuals that being that high risk, high need category, we know that we need our awareness much more broad. And I'll explain here as to why that is. Really quickly, if you were interested in knowing just how many individuals are in our community right now and subject to broad notification, you could go onto our public registrant search site tool and you could say, show them all to me. And I did that right before our recording today. And at that moment, there were 440. So out of 17,000 plus, we have 440 that we get to share that broad information about. And that may be disheartening, but do understand that for those 440 we get to talk about, their behaviors, their conduct apply across the board. The ways that they're accessing those that they harm and the ways that they're managing that victim are applicable in most all these scenarios. So do take an opportunity to check some of them out, and use that information that is shared to augment your understanding and safety planning efforts. You'll see that out of that 440 at this moment, there are 6 who are out of compliance with their registration requirement. And you may contemplate what value sharing non-compliant registrants has. But the reality is that the community itself is one of those pillars of the state's risk management system. You've no doubt contemplated that while the Bloomington PD is exceptionally good at what they do, and they are responsive and capable of doing great things, they are a limited, finite resource. They cannot simply be everywhere all the time, nor can corrections agents when they're involved, and so on. But the community is. And so by making yourself aware of those individuals, you may find that you've come across somebody out of that 6, or somebody you know may be aware of them. And you can certainly reach out to law enforcement and say, hey, I saw this individual in this scenario or setting, just want to let you know. And law enforcement will be eager to assist that registrant in getting back into compliance with the registry. Other information I want to share with you on the research comes from our federal research studies, and it really mirrors our state information. But I like to put it in here just so you have some diversity in the data I share. And this relates to the relationships between those who engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, and the people they hurt. And as you can see here, the majority of those harmed are known to the offender, to the person hurting them. They're either an acquaintance or in a familial type relationship. 7% fall into that stranger category. And unquestionably, that is the category that gives us the most pause, as it should, because we have a great deal of influence over those in our lives, be they family or relationships or acquaintances. And we can set healthy boundaries when and if and where we need to. But that stranger group is that chunk that we don't have direct impact or influence over. And so it's important to understand some of the limitations of studies like these. These researchers have to determine a cutoff of what constitutes a knowing or a relationship. It has been determined across the various paradigms that do these kinds of research that 24 hours is the threshold. If an assessor or researcher cannot show that a knowing between a perpetrator and a victim has existed of 24 hours or greater, they will move them into that stranger bucket. And so inevitably, this would include scenarios like this, where an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old are in attendance at a social gathering. Think a house party in a neighboring neighborhood or community. And they're there with the watchful group, and they meet each other and they hit it off. And they, through the course of the evening, decide that they're going to go to an isolated location within the home or outside of the home. And the night takes a turn. Now, this scenario would fall into the stranger category. But what we tend to think of more as family members, as concerned community members, when we think of stranger, is that person lurking just beyond our awareness, just beyond the scope of our knowledge, who has ill intent. They mean to do harm. That group falls into a much smaller percentile of about 3%. Now, as you wrap your head around that, there's no doubt in my mind that that is a very cold comfort. But what I do not want is for you to review this information and to target all of your energy onto that smallest percentage group. I want you to understand that the much more likely scenario of harm will be perpetrated by somebody who has established a relationship of trust with the person they're hurting and who has attained or maintained isolated contact with that person. Last bit of data I want to share with you, and we'll get into the specifics about the man you're here to learn about, but I think that this is probably one of the most anchoring pieces of data when it comes to this important topic. And this is the age of those harmed. And this brings us back to the Minnesota information. And as you can see here, it is broken into thirds. But very quickly, you're going to look to those age ranges in front of you. And you're going to see that 2/3 are children. 2/3 of this pie. And then you're really going to scrutinize those age ranges. And you're going to see that the narrowest age range up there, those teenage years, constitutes 33% of those being harmed. That is 9% of our population, and that is a staggering fact. And it is worth unpacking to some extent what is going on here. What we know as agencies and organizations researching this important information and in collaboration with our victim services partners is that with those children in those early years, the infancy to that preteen range are still very much under the watchful, caring oversight of their trusted adult support networks. So we as agencies want to make sure that we're getting those trusted, safe adults the best tools available to vet the people coming into those kids' lives who may get to attain unmonitored contact and trust. But when we get to those teenage years, we run into the very thing we seek for our kids within our community. And that is a space for them to go out and explore and express themselves and develop their own autonomy. And they deserve every bit of that. But it is what makes them vulnerable, this population, because now these children are formulating relationships of trust outside of that watchful, caring oversight of that trusted adult support network. And they're formulating relationships of trust with people that we don't have direct impact or knowledge of. And so we've looked at the models that we've used to really follow as society and how to inform and educate our children in these critical age ranges. And the old model was the talk, where parents or loved ones would pull their kid aside at those critical age and remove the veil just enough to show them that the world was not as safe as it had been made to be for them when they were younger. But what we found with those versions or methods of approaching kids with this important information is that we got one of two very distinct reactions from them. Either we'd get sheer rejection. They'd say, Dad, Mom, I hear you, but my friends are fine. You're overreacting. Everything's fine. Or we'd get straight fear, where our child would become so disturbed by the information shared that they would withdraw from the very things they'd come to love in their lives. Neither reaction is what we seek. And so what we've come to understand as being far more effective with our kids and these important conversations is that we want a lot of little talks throughout their life progress that are age appropriate in their design so as not to generate fear in our kids. Because we understand as parents and community that scared kids do not equal safe kids. But we need our children to understand that nice people do not always equal safe people. And so I will have in my resources some additional information for you to seek out assistance if you're thinking about how to have those age appropriate conversations that will grow with the child so that by the time they get to those teenage years, they have a robust toolbox to draw from of body safety, of setting and maintaining boundaries and rules, and how to engage safe adults if and when they need to. And so that will all be available here to you momentarily. I do want to show you and share with you just really quickly. I mentioned that with those younger age groups, we want to provide those trusted adult support people with resources so they can vet the individuals coming into those kids' lives. And these are two state tools that are very useful. You can go onto the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's website, and they maintain the registry, which is not accessible to the public. However, they do have the public criminal history search tool, where you can go on there and enter in anybody's first name, last name, and date of birth and see their Minnesota criminal history. And I encourage you to do that. If you're vetting somebody who may be coming in to be a youth pastor or a soccer, assistant soccer coach or a tutor for a child or a care provider, run them through that system and just see what may come up so that you can have a better informed determination on whether or not you're going to grant them that level of access and trust. Additional resources are on our Department of Corrections website, where all the research that I shared with you just a moment ago is there in its pure form, not just simple pie charts. And I encourage you to take a look at that and read through it and draw your own conclusions. We also maintain the locator tool of all individuals under our jurisdiction. You can see where they're at, who they're working with, and the public registrant search tool, where that 400 sum that I shared with you a moment ago can be found when you're interested or want to look. I want to shift gears now and speak to you about the man you're here to learn about today. Use the information we've provided thus far as that overlay. See where things may align with him and where they may diverge. This is Johnny Bloodsaw, Jr. First, I want to speak to photographs. Photographs are updated on average of annually, or if the individual were to dramatically change or modify their appearance. So if this individual were to grow a big beard or grow out their hair or shave their head and just otherwise modify their look, law enforcement will collect updated photographs and get them onto the registry, where I will then collect them and place them onto that public registrant search site, so that you will always have an accurate photograph of the individual for as long as they are subject to this level of notification. These are the registrant's known vitals. He is currently 64 years of age, and he is residing at the 8000 block of Upton Avenue South here in Bloomington. Now, I want to take a moment here to speak to a question that will often come up in meetings like this, and that is, will we be told, or can we learn of where he lives precisely, his exact address? And you'll recall from my earlier information that specific knowledge is available to law enforcement and is very much known by them, but is not available to the community at large. We utilize proximal addresses because we've experienced over the years an amount of vigilantism targeted against those who engage in this type of harm that shocks the conscience. And you may contemplate as to whether or not that's a big enough issue to omit that level of specific information. And the problem we run into when it comes to notification is that this process is challenged in courts rather frequently. And one of the arguments against notification at this level is that it is harmful, is that it is causing a significant amount of additional harm that extends well beyond the criminal sentencing prescription that the state has placed on the individual. And we will argue against that in those court situations and share with the court that by informing communities of this important information, we mitigate risk. However, for every house that catches fire, for every registrant that is beaten or run out of town or harassed, our argument begins to tip. And the court starts to contemplate that whether or not the benefits of notification continue to outweigh the costs. And so we seek to mitigate and eliminate vigilantism where we can, as it also serves to disrupt the very community where you reside. We don't need somebody coming in from well outside the Bloomington community to exact some revenge scenario that does nothing to restore a victim and does nothing to mitigate risk overall. And so this is why we utilize the proximal address. This is the registrant's registrable offense history summary. It is available to you in the fact sheet that law enforcement's already provided, and it is also on that public registrant search tool for you to review at your leisure. But I want to really take a moment now and get into the specifics about what led to this individual's risk level assignment and where we're at today. So this individual came to the knowledge of the criminal justice system through law enforcement and the courts in 1986. This well precedes the registry, remembering that that came online in 1991. In 1986, he had a conviction for criminal sexual conduct in the 4th degree out of Hennepin County. His conduct targeted was leveled against a 13-year-old female victim whom he had a relationship with. He befriended this victim and used manipulation and coercion in order to maintain control. And for this crime, once it became known to law enforcement, he received the sentence of 1 year and a day with a 3-year stay on probation. So I'm going to take a moment here to answer another question that will often come up in meetings like this. And that question is formed in some way, shape of why is it that the state allows those who engage in this type of harm that shocks the conscience, to come back out if only to re-engage in it once again? And part of the answer to that question lies here in determinate sentencing. Prior to determinate sentencing, we had a more familiar model of parole. Parole has been popularized through TV and movies, and most people have a fundamental understanding of how parole works. But essentially, a person who is sentenced to prison and has that sentence executed and enters the prison system will serve a portion of time in the prison facility, and then when eligible, will go before a panel or a board and plead with them for the opportunity to serve the remainder of their time back in the community, adjusting back to life outside the prison walls. And that panel would have the ultimate say as to whether or not they'd allow that process to go forward. Now, for those that engaged in this type of harm, person crimes, again, that really shocked the conscience, as you might well imagine, they found it exceptionally difficult to get a parole board or panel to agree to allow them out prematurely, and would usually end up sitting the entirety of their sentence to expiration. And as a brief aside, as you think about the Minnesota population of incarcerated persons at this given moment, know that over 90% of them will return to our communities. They will be coming out. And so what we found with our data on recidivism, reoffending in a same or similar fashion, was that this model failed to mitigate the risk of reoffending in any meaningful way. What was happening was they would languish in the facility up until their expiration, and they'd be told sternly by a guard at their expiration date as they walked them to the gate, do not come back. And like I said, what we found was that was ineffective. And so we, along with many other states in the nation, went away from that parole model to a determinate sentencing model. Determinate sentencing places the amount of time for all crimes enumerated in Minnesota law into the hands of the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission. The Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission convenes every year and determines the length of time for every type of crime in Minnesota law books. On that commission must sit by law a victim of a person crime. So every year they review these offenses and they determine how much time they'll get. 1 year and a day is the lowest amount of time that can be given for a felony sentence. Misdemeanor sentences, gross misdemeanor and misdemeanor, carry with them a penalty of up to 1 year, and then felony goes 1 year and a day. That's why you see that weird metric. With determinate sentencing, a person who does go into prison, who has that sentence executed onto them or imposed onto them, will serve by law 2/3 of that time in the institution, in prison, and 1/3 will be served in the community on supervised release. What this allows for is for them to work toward achieving skills and tools while in the institution, getting treatment and other services provided to them that is then handed off to a corrections agent, a supervision agent on the outside, who will then move them through kind of a warm handoff into the community and have them work through their aftercare programming until that expiration date. And what we found again from that data and research was this method allowed the individual to better internalize those skills and tools that we know mitigate risk, and far in a way impacted recidivism in a very positive way. So proved to be highly effective. So that's determinate sentencing in a nutshell. You'll see the 3-year stay. So again, we didn't have the registry at this time, and we certainly did not have notification back then. But just to kind of show you, he was granted probation initially, and in 1989, that stay was vacated, and he was committed to the Commissioner of Corrections. And the reason that stay was vacated is because his continuing conduct showed the court that he was not amenable to community-based supervision. In 1988, he was convicted out of Anoka County for soliciting or inducing or promoting prostitution. This conduct was against a 15-year-old and 17-year-old female whom he knew. He accessed these victims through his continued patterns of befriending these vulnerable minors and then trying to manipulate or coerce them. And for this crime, once it became known to law enforcement, he received a 15-month commit with a 5-year stay. So 5 years of probation, so 15 months. So you can see the ratcheting effect of determinate sentencing. We went from a year and a day now to 15 months. And again, you see that date of the sentence was also vacated. They were all run together effectively. And there's one more here. So he went to prison in 89. And this is why. So in 1989, he was convicted of a criminal sexual conduct 3rd degree. Again, still predating the registry and predating notification. This crime was against a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old female, again, whom he had a relationship developed with. And he continued once again that pattern. What he was doing was he would find vulnerable teens and he would provide them with mood-altering substances and friendship and kindness, at least initially, and then he would turn them out into prostitution. That was his MO. We would call it today sex trafficking, but very much was engaging in that type of conduct. For this crime, he received a 55-month commit to the Commissioner of Corrections. Again, 2/3 in, 1/3 out. You can see here there's no stay. This was the one that triggered his prison time. The court had grown quite weary of his continued pattern of conduct and behavior and said, no more time in the community. You must do your prison time. So 2/3 in, 1/3 out, everything falls underneath this 55-month. This is the governing file. And again, this all predates the registry and notification. So had it ended here, we wouldn't be talking about this individual today. However, it did not. And so in 1991, now we have registration online. This is his first registrable offense because this is when the registry started and it was not retroactive. He was convicted again of a criminal sexual conduct 3rd degree, once again out of Hennepin County. This crime was against a 15-year-old female, same MO. He befriended this victim. She was vulnerable to him, and he turned her out effectively. He got her hooked and manipulated and coerced her into the sex trade. For this crime, again, you can see that ratcheting effect continues. Now he has 95 months commit to the Commissioner of Corrections, no stay, no probation, and he's registered. So now we have him registered as a sex offender on that predatory offender registry. He is a very well-known entity to law enforcement by this time. However, we still have not hit that threshold of community notification for him. We hadn't started that until 1997. Here's how we get there. In 2000, now we have that full array of that broader risk management system online and operating. He's brought in for promoting prostitution. Again, similar MO, this time against an adult female, but very much a teen, vulnerable individual whom he established that relationship of trust and manipulated and coerced. Like I said, today we would call it sex trafficking. And for this crime, once again, that ratcheting effect of determinate sentencing, every previous conviction is a history point, and those history points will increase the amount of time of the sentence. And so now he gets 120-month commit, 2/3 in, 1/3 out on supervision. And this concludes his known patterns of offending conduct in this sexual nature, in this sexual. So it would indicate a success of the programs and processes that finally had come online to capture individuals like this and their conduct and behavior. As it sits today with this individual, he is no longer under correctional supervision. He has had his rights restored to him. He is not on probation or supervised release, which is Minnesota's version of parole. He is subject to the registry until 2042. Now, registration can be restarted and will be restarted if he is convicted of any new crimes, regardless of what that crime may be, and incarcerated as a result. Any reincarcerations for new criminal conduct restart that aging clock. The aging clock, or the typical or common term for registration, is 10 years, or the duration of supervision, whichever is longer. Every time, like I said, if they come back through that threshold, and if for any new crime, that aging clock resets and their 10 years begins anew. If that crime is a failure to register, a crime against the administration of justice in that they're not complying with the registration, the state adds an additional 5 years onto that term. So any failure to registers will become 15 years of registration. If he were to be charged or convicted of a new criminal sexual conduct or sex-related offense, he will be registered for life and would bear the potential of civil commitment to the state security hospital. So there's a great deal riding on his continued success or abstinence from re-engaging this type of behavior or conduct. I'm going to shift gears now to resources. As you've received a lot of information from me here at the front end, it is like trying to take a drink out of a fire hose, but I really appreciate you bearing with us and taking in all this important information. As you're wondering about how to apply this, or if you may have questions that weren't addressed directly in this presentation, I want you to know that your best and most prominent resource is your local law enforcement. The Bloomington Police Department has been managing and working with this unique population for an exceptionally long time, and they are very good at what they do. Do reach out to them. If you see this individual engaging in conduct or behavior that you know to be concerning or may pose an imminent threat to others, I want you to call 911. If you just have questions more generally about how the Bloomington Police Department partners with other law enforcement entities and agencies and how they do the important work that they do contact their non-emergency number, and they'll be happy to share with you the information that you're looking for. Other resources I want to share with you as you're contemplating how to get more information on this important topic. You can go to our own Minnesota Department of Corrections Office of Victim Services and Restorative Justice Programs. They are there to assist in any kind of questions you may have about notification. If you're a victim of a individual that would trigger enhanced notification, and you've heard me discuss that you can have that level of information shared with you about the person that hurt you, this would be the entity to reach out to, and they will get you signed up for such a thing. If you're just wondering about how to gain more insight and knowledge on this important topic, or how to have conversations with your kids about this, they are a great resource for that as well. Other resources I want to share, given the specific nature of harm that this individual engaged in, meaning that he really focused on those vulnerable kids that didn't have the supports and resources perhaps available to them and were susceptible to this type of predation and harm. The Link is one of, I think, the premier organizations within Hennepin County for kids at risk. So at-risk youth. So if you know of any youth that may be struggling at home or with just maintaining resources and boundaries, and are susceptible to those individuals that may try to seduce them into harmful behaviors and conduct, do reach out to this organization. They can do outreach and help. If you are somebody who is feeling that this type of behavior might impact you, or you're struggling yourself, they have an outreach team, and I encourage you to either call or text. There is support and help for you out there. Do reach out. Additional resources can be found at Stop It Now. This is for those that are troubled by or having problem thinking that want to stop that pattern. If you find that you're struggling with this kind of thinking or behavior, this is a great resource and option. You don't have to go to the point of harm to get the help you might need. And for those that are not on that side of the coin but want to support others, it's a great resource for you as well. Do check them out. This is just another quick snapshot of some resources. We have additional resource sheets on our website. I'll be happy to email them out. My contact information will be at the end of the slide. Certainly do reach out. But the information I've shared with you here today is the tip of the iceberg. And I want you to know that there's so much good information out there and encourage you to continue to educate and inform yourself on this important topic. This wraps up the presentation and the information I've shared. If you've taken nothing else away from all that I've put out there, I hope that sincerely it is this, that from what we know, from all of our data and research on this topic, is that those who engage in this type of harm, who go through that full array of the state's risk management system, do not go on to reoffend in a same or similar fashion. They do not recidivate. 90% of those engaging in this type of harm develop a knowing or a trust with the people they're hurting and exploit that trust to gain unmonitored contact. And that last 90 is really the inverse of the first. If I were to take all, whatever it was, 17,000 individuals plus that are on the registry today in Minnesota, and I were to eliminate them, place them on the moon, I would have impacted sex crimes in our state by no better than 90%, or no better than 10%, sorry. 10%. That is just not enough. 90% of those engaging in harm like this are not yet known to the system as those engaging in sexual harm and need intervention. It really does come down to those two R's. That social proximity, those relationships of trust are so much more predictive of potential harm than any geographical proximity could or would ever be. Especially in our more mediated societies, those individuals, regardless of where their head hits the pillow, have access to potentially vulnerable persons. And so broadening our awareness to ensure that we're there being supportive of those that might be at risk, identifying them and getting them services and structure, and ensuring that we're mitigating those potential risk areas is so much more effective than any prohibition on geographical proximity could ever be. I'd like to thank you for bearing with us. I know it can be a long presentation, but I do genuinely hope that this was valuable information for you. I would like to thank the Bloomington Police Department and all of its efforts to ensure that the best information is being provided to its community. If you have any questions, please do reach out to either Detective Harms or Detective Brown or the Bloomington PD, and they will be more than happy to assist you. I am also here as a resource. If you have questions about the registration process, notification processes, I can be here to assist as well. Thank you very much and be well.
And Brad, thank you. Thank you for sharing this information with us. And also to those watching this, thanks for taking the time out to get informed and watch this video.